and it's incredible. Let's talk about it. Being a better dungeon master. Whether you're ride or die right now, you're actually hanging out watching on Twitch, or if you're magically in the future watching on YouTube. Whatever the case may be. You want to be a better dungeon master if you're looking at this. Or you want to see what the Zangief cosplay is all about. Either or. The first one of these I did was all about the first session of your game, regardless of what system, whatever. The first session of your game is always going to be very similar no matter what system you're doing. So I encourage y'all to check that one out if you are trying to get a little bit better at being a dungeon master. Today we're talking about picking the game. And I do these off the cuff, so apologies when I'm sitting here thinking, but I'm organizing my thoughts. And you get to just stare at my beauty while I ponder. First and foremost, you should involve your players in the decision. But it's got to start with the dungeon master. And by that I mean, you got to pick some games that you're even interested in running. That's part one. Because if you're not trying to run the game, then it's going to be a shit show. So you should come up with at least 3, maybe 5 max options, 3 to 5, that you'd be willing. And by willing, I mean interested, you want to fucking run the game. Because it doesn't matter the system, it's going to be a lot of work. Then, come to your players, whether you're chatting in a Discord room, or you're talking, or you're face-to-face, or whatever. Come to your players and say, yo, I'm trying to run these games. And at this stage, I wouldn't have too much in mind about the theme of the game you want to run. What up, Benner House? Yeah, I chopped it all off. It's hot as fuck. Now I just have a mohawk. Hope you're doing good, man. Come to your players with the 35 games you're trying to run. And at this stage, you don't have much in your mind about the game. The theme of it. What you do want to have in mind are the objectives of the games that you've picked. Now, you might be like, oh, but we're talking about role-playing games, so the objective to role-play. It's not true. Let me give you 2 straight-up examples from campaigns. Look at Squash. Look at that tiny baby. She lays on her toys because she thinks they're going to hatch. Look at her. You don't have anything that cute at all. But this cat isn't even as cute as my girlfriend. She's a little sweetie though. Look, I'm petting her with my thumb. Anyway, back to the point. Hold up, let me toke this. It'll help me remember the point. Yes. So games, role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games have objectives. Sorry. The objective isn't just to roleplay. Sometimes it is. But what I mean by this, my 2 examples, currently I'm running a Dungeon World campaign, and I'm going to be running a Labyrinth Lord campaign. Now, if you have no idea what those are, Dungeon World is a great free game that it probably sounds like I shill, but it is just literally one of the best tabletop games I've ever played. If you've heard of Apocalypse World, which is also great, Dungeon World is inspired by Apocalypse World. It's a My titties growled here, jeez. It's a fantasy take on the similar mechanics that you'll find in Apocalypse World, and the point of both games is something kind of rare amongst tabletop. The point of both games is to allow the players to almost fully dictate the campaign. Their moves, in a lot of ways, allow them to interact directly with the narrative itself in a really cool way. It's a little tough to explain. I mean, that pretty much explains it, but if you want examples, I just encourage you pull up either Apocalypse World, Dungeon World, just read some of the moves, and you'll see how they interact directly with the narrative. So the point of those games, you're like, what's the objective of this game? It is to give the players an opportunity to fully develop a character, or kill it, start a new one, whatever they want to do, in a world that morphs around their characters, right? That's the point of the game. Something totally different than this Labyrinth Lord campaign I'm going to run. If you look at Labyrinth Lord as a game, and what Labyrinth Lord is, if you've never heard of that, it's by Goblinoid Games. You can find it on their website for free. It's basically a look at 1986 Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Maybe a little bit earlier than that. Yeah, it's not really second edition. But whatever. Just Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, cleaned up, serial numbers filed off, released for free. Though you gotta pay if you want a fancy copy, of course. Just like Dungeon World. You can buy Dungeon World if you want a nice one, but otherwise you can just check it out for free. But Labyrinth Lord is very old school, definite 1970s, 1980s. So that means, what's the objective of that game? Well, the objective is to explore dungeons, get into random encounters on the way and to and from them, and get loot in order to get more powerful. That's the objective of the game. That's, however narrative you dress it up around that, fundamentally, that's what the players are going to do. So when I'm saying come to your players with these 3 to 5 games you're trying to run, don't have your campaign in mind. Don't be like, all right, it's going to be witch hunters, or it's going to be, you know, whatever. Do have in mind the objectives of the games that you're bringing to the table. And a couple more examples to make the objective more clear. Like, I would say Shadowrun, the objective is to tell a cool story that involves the characters, but unlike Dungeon World, which can kind of morph around them because so much is able to be done on the fly, most other systems, there's a lot of prep involved. So, like, if you're like, what's the objective of Shadowrun? It would be similar to Dungeon World, to have a narrative developed that involves the characters, but it can only morph around them so much due to the nature of how much shit you need to have prepared ahead of time, right? Or, like, what's the... Again, the simple one, what's the objective of Dungeons and Dragons? Same as Labyrinth Lord. For your player characters to travel to and from dungeon locations. And by that, it could be anything. It could be a camp of goblins. It could be a temple. It could be whatever. But fundamentally, it's a dungeon. Acquire loot, magic items, in order to gain experience, become more powerful. Boom, boom. That's the point of the game. So the reason you come at your players, the objectives, because that's going to define what kind of campaign you have. No matter how you dress it up, no matter how you paint it up or theme it or whatever, that's going to be the style of campaign you're going to be playing. So, for instance, again, a straight up real life example, the reason I'm starting a second campaign, Labyrinth Lord, is because of the nature of the way that this group of players plays Dungeon World. So far, they like to stay in one area and kind of like just go kind of like fully explore all the plot lines in that area. So far this campaign, which has been going for like 6 months or so now, they haven't even like gone to a dungeon or anything like that. So instead of like forcing that in the game, they have some shit on the horizon that they could easily do, but it seems like they're more enjoying the drama surrounding their starting village. We're just gonna start another game that beats a little more regularly, and we're gonna do Labyrinth Lord because it's very crunchy yet very simple. It'll be a little less story-oriented. Combine that into one word, story-oriented. New today. Rare. New words. It'll be less story-oriented, but it'll satisfy that urge because they'll be going into, you know, tile-by-tile dungeons, fighting shit, more war game style, where in Dungeon World the fights are more like free-form narrative type stuff. This will be crunchy, like, alright, I can go this many yards and da-da-da-da. Not a lot of that in Dungeon World. And that's a little bit tied into the objective too. It's important to keep in mind how you're going to get to that objective when you're laying, you know, the games you're willing to run out to your players. Because, for instance, when you're talking about, alright, we'll play old school Dungeons and Dragons, you're saying you're going to go to dungeon locations, get in random encounters, gain XP, get loot and magic items to become more powerful, and you will do this in a very simulation-y, wargamey way, right? Whereas, you know, other systems are less so, things like that. So, when you take these games to your players, then it's really on you to let them fully decide. Globe Dice, say hello. What up, man? Sorry if I'm on a roll. Let me take a sip of water. So, choose games you're willing to run, and by willing, you fucking want to. Don't plan the game yet, but come up with the objective of the game. See the first part to definition and examples of what that means, because, of course, the objective is to roleplay, but a little deeper than that. Then you're coming to your players with these 3 to 5 games that you want to run, and you're going to let them completely fucking decide. And you can't fuck with it. You can't, like, come in, have a favorite ahead of time, whatever. You can't really do that. Unless, here's the caveat, if you have played several games with the group, if you know your players pretty well, then it's alright to complete DM Fiat and be like, this is what we're doing. Because if you know your players well, they're going to almost prefer that. But if your players don't know you well, or you don't know your players well, maybe it's your first couple games with them, it is far better to do it this way. And you're honestly building up some trust with those players. So down the road, when you're like, I'm gonna run this like this, they'll be like, yes. So, they pick. They talk amongst themselves. You should chill with them too, you know, bullshit back and forth. But they're gonna decide what system. Fully gonna decide what system. Now this is going to tie back into the video I mentioned the first time I did this, which is, sorry for the camera, by the way. I'm actually an apparition that struggles to focus on my form. My first video in this series, How to Be a Better DM, or I guess just be a better DM. I made it a command. Get it done. I talk about the first session of your game. And this is where you're going to really set up like the theme of your game, right? But I'll address it a little bit here. Because at this stage, you will have picked the game, which is what we're talking about, right? And the funny part is, you didn't pick it all. You picked some options, and then your players decided what game you're playing. When you're talking about your theme, your world, that type of thing, and to give an example of what I mean by theme, the party are vampire hunters, or and they're all belong to a certain church, or they're mercenaries, or they're all from the same village, or they're pirates, or they're captured slaves together, or a million different ways. That why are you together thing, right? Uh, theme also ties into what type of game are you going to be expecting, and that origin even tells a little bit of it. If you're captured slaves, kind of going to be like a brutal game, Vampire hunters, could be a lot of positive versus negative energy, magic, and undead, and all that. But then to expound on that a little bit, some other themes would be like, for instance, this Dungeon World game we have going is Viking themed. So the cult, like the laws and gods and names and all that, are themed like that. Or another theme would be political, right? You have political intrigue game. That would be a theme to it. It'd be most, kind of fantasy House of Cards or whatever. You get it. So I encourage people, let your players select the system. Then your first session, you're gonna spend the majority of that making characters, and while you're going through that process, talking about the world, what type of theme they want. For instance, if you're playing, I'll give you just another real world example, this Labyrinth Lord game. Now, I've had these same players for a while, so I just straight up, here's what we're doing. I could tell I wanted to address this need, maybe just for me, for that wargamey type, but they were in too. And I decided, something I've never done before, but it seems cool. The party are like the campaign's called For King and Country, and the party are essentially fantasy Black Ops or Kingdom or some shit. I haven't thought too deep about it yet. So it gives them an excuse to go into these dungeon scenarios and without having to have too deep of a story to it, because it is old school. So really, they're just trying to travel there through wilderness hexes, random encounters, and so forth. So it gives an excuse to be like, you go here, do this, boom, yes sir. And I'm gonna have them design like their patch. Like if you Google like Black Ops patches, you'll see all these different crazy patches. This dude wrote a book about them actually. I'm gonna make the players, as part of their character generation, to design what their patch is for their unit. Yeah, I think that's that. Bullshitted about 20 minutes. The summary of this part of this, and I'm just gonna keep, cranking these out. Not in any specific order or anything. Just different facets of how to be a better DM. So you can watch one if that's the area you need to get better at, or you can watch them all to get a bigger picture. Role-playing games have objectives other than role-playing. You, as the dungeon master, should pick 3 to 5 games that you're trying to run. By trying, I mean you want to. You're into it. Figure out what the objectives of these games are. Whether if it's like old school, it's just to go loot, get more powerful, more narrative based, whatever. And it's important to know how you get there too. Whether it's like simulation, war game style, or more loose. Present these to your players, 3 to 5 options, but let them decide amongst themselves. Just majority vote what you're going to play, and essentially what you're going to run. So don't pick something you don't really want to run. As far as the theme of your game, not really covered in this video, covered in another one I made called the first session. And I encourage people to pick the theme in the first session. So not really related to picking the game. This should be two independent things. Choosing what game you run should be based around what objectives everyone wants to be accomplishing in the game. And then the theme should come about as you're creating characters and you're bullshitting back and forth during the first sessions. No problem if you come in there with some ideas in your head, but really, as everything, to be a good dungeon master, it's got to be mostly about your players. So I think that wraps it up. Unless there's any questions, class. If you just tuned in, just missed it. Any questions, class? Feel like we covered it all on that aspect.